It begins with a breath of wind among the stones. High in the Pyrenees, where mist curls like incense between peaks, there lies a monastery that most maps have forgotten. Its walls, veiled in moss and memory, breathe in silence. Candles tremble along its corridors, and every sound, the creak of wood, the slow fall of wax, the distant toll of unseen bells, feels like it belongs to another century. Within this cloister of time, a single chamber waits. Inside, beneath an arch carved with fading saints, stands a clock that does not measure the passing of hours. It sits upon a pedestal of blackened oak, its brass face dimmed by centuries of candle smoke. There are no numbers, no hands that sweep, only a circle of sigils, symbols that seem to shimmer faintly when the flame bends, as though they are written not in gold, but in breath. Each night, as the monks finish their prayers and the last psalm dissolves into the rafters, one man stays behind. Brother Anselm, quiet and pale as parchment, tends the candle before the clock. He listens. Always he listens. For there is a faint ticking, irregular, arrhythmic, like a heartbeat that forgot its body. Sometimes it stops entirely. Sometimes it rushes like rain against glass. It is not the sound of time passing, but of something else, something trying to return. The monastery records say the clock arrived in the year 1242, though even that date feels uncertain. It was brought, they say, by a traveler wrapped in gray wool, who crossed the mountains from the south and asked for sanctuary. In the morning he was gone. Only the clock remained, and a scrap of vellum folded beneath it. 3 words written in Latin. Tempus oblitum estate. Time is forgotten. No one ever discovered its maker. Some said it was a heretical device, a relic from an age that should not exist. Others believed it was crafted by monks of a vanished order, guardians of the Anni Perditae, the lost years whispered about in apocryphal texts. Historians dismiss such tales, yet in these high valleys, facts dissolve easily into fog. Brother Anselm has kept vigil beside the clock for 40 years. He has mapped its strange rhythm, drawn patterns from its silences. On parchment yellowed like autumn leaves, he charts not the hours, but the absences between them. Some nights he swears the gaps widen, as though time itself stretches thin. In those moments he feels a pressure behind the walls, like centuries pressing close, trying to remember themselves. When storms pass through the mountains, the ticking grows louder. It fills the hall with uneven echoes, bouncing from stone to stone. The brothers whisper that during such nights, the dead rise to walk unseen cloisters. Yet Anselm believes the sound comes from within, that the monastery itself is remembering. In the archives, beneath layers of dust, he once found an older mention of a similar device. A chronometer of sigils said to have existed in the vanished kingdom of Aragon, around the 9th century, long before the official founding of the monastery. The record describes a clock that marked the years men forgot, built to honor the silence between ages. But those chronicles end abruptly, as if erased. 3 centuries later, history resumes again, untouched and unaware of what was missing. Anselm began to suspect that his clock and that legend were the same, that perhaps the device did not measure time, it remembered it, that within its silent gears, the missing centuries still turned, unseen and unspeakable. One winter night, when the air hung thick with snow and no flame would hold, he brought his candle before the clock and whispered aloud the old inscription. Tempus oblitum estate. For a moment the ticking ceased. The entire monastery seemed to hold its breath. Then a faint vibration passed through the floor, like the tremor of a vast will shifting in the dark. He closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, he saw visions that were not dreams. A city buried beneath frost, bells ringing in languages never spoken, faces of kings who ruled without ever being born. He saw pages of history unscrolling and then burning to ash. The sound of wind filled his ears, but beneath it was a deeper silence. Vast, oceanic, ancient. The silence of years erased but not gone. When he opened his eyes again, the clock was still. The candle burned with a steady flame. Yet he felt older or perhaps less himself. The sigils on the clock face glowed faintly, like stars seen through tears. He understood then what no chronicle could say. The clock was not broken. It was complete. It did not count the living hours, for those were transient. It kept vigil over what had been taken, over the unwritten span between centuries. The monks who once wound it had long since turned to dust, but the device endured, holding the memory of a time the world had chosen to forget. Anselm knelt before it, resting his hand upon the cold brass. It did not move. It did not tick. Yet within that stillness he felt movement, like the slow rotation of the earth beneath mountains, too vast for human senses to perceive. He thought of how easily time deceives, how entire empires vanish, and history smooths the gaps as if nothing were missing. Perhaps, he wondered, time is not a river at all, but a labyrinth. Perhaps the clock was its map. He rose and blew out the candle. The darkness was soft, not fearful. Through the silence, he could still feel the pulse of something immense, not counting forward, but inward. Not the hours we live, but the breath between them. And in that silence he understood. Some years are not lost. They are only sleeping, waiting for someone to listen. The clock has not ticked in centuries now. The monastery has fallen to ruin, its corridors claimed by ivy, its stones scattered by wind. Yet those who wander the Pyrenean paths at dusk say that, if you press your ear to the earth, you can hear it, a slow, uneven ticking from deep below. Perhaps it marks nothing. Perhaps it measures everything we have chosen to forget. Or perhaps, like all sacred things, it simply waits, counting not the passage of hours, but the echo of what remains uncounted. It begins with a whisper, not a war. In the crumbling archives of an empire that no longer breathes, a historian finds a decree without a date. The parchment is sealed with crimson wax, yet beneath the wax, the signature fades into nothing. It bears the crest of an emperor whose reign appears in every chronicle, and yet, between 2 recorded years of his rule, there is a silence of 300. No wars, no births, no deaths, a stretch of time that never existed, yet left its shadow behind. The story opens in a vast marble hall, long abandoned to dust. Shafts of sunlight fall through cracked glass, illuminating fragments of fresco. A coronation, a victory procession, a crown suspended above an unseen head. The air hums faintly, as though the stones themselves remember the sound of ceremony. It is said the emperor once commanded the greatest realm of the early Middle Ages, his empire stretching from the mountains of Gaul to the silver seas of Byzantium. He was beloved, feared, immortalized in coins that bore his solemn gaze. And yet, somewhere between his 12th and 13th year upon the throne, the record stops. The next decree leaps centuries ahead, signed by a descendant whose ancestors seem to have ruled an empty calendar. Scholars have called it a clerical error, others a religious myth. But in the empire's oldest monasteries, among the stone corridors that smell of candle smoke and damp vellum, monks whisper another theory. One too sacred or too dangerous to write down. They say the emperor, in his pursuit of divine knowledge, tried to reorder time itself. He gathered astronomers, priests, and mathematicians beneath the vaults of his palace. They charted the heavens, mapping each star to the pulse of the human heart. They calculated the distance between prayers and dawn, between seasons and the breath of angels. And then, one night, he ordered all clocks destroyed. Time is not the will of God, he is said to have murmured. Time is the shadow of our forgetting. After that decree, no one truly knows what happened. The empire's calendars were rewritten. Temples built upon old ruins bear inscriptions that blend centuries like threads in a tapestry too vast to untangle. Coins from vanished dynasties appear in graves of later kings. It is as though the world itself skipped a heartbeat, an age swallowed by silence. The legend tells that the emperor, upon realizing the price of his experiment, vanished into seclusion. Some say he retreated into a mirrored chamber that no servant was permitted to enter. Others claim he walked into the desert, carrying only a single candle that never went out. But one account, the last note in a monk's chronicle before the records fall blank, describes a night of terrible stillness. No bells, no wind, no motion of stars. The monk wrote, "The world held its breath, and when it exhaled, 3 centuries were gone. When the empire rose again, the sun still shone, the cities still stood, and no one remembered what had been lost. Only a few relics remained. Statues eroded beyond names, manuscripts whose ink dissolved mid-sentence, and a clock that refused to count its hours. The same clock, perhaps, that would one day rest in a monastery in the Pyrenees." The historian who first found the undated decree wrote in his journal, "I feel as though time is not a straight road, but a circle closing behind me." A few nights later he disappeared. Some say he followed the emperor's path, into the realm of the uncounted years, where silence reigns like a second sun. And perhaps, in that silence, both ruler and scholar walk still, through corridors that echo without end, beneath a sky that never moves, in an empire that forgot to wake. Perhaps they wait, not for time to return, but for someone someday to remember that it was missing at all. There is a town in southern France where the river sings at night. Its waters are calm by day, clear, green, and harmless, but after dusk, when the bells of the cathedral fade into the hills, the river begins to hum. It is not the sound of current or wind, but something softer, like distant voices rising through water. The villagers call it the memory beneath the current. Long ago, before the wars and the bridges, before even the first stones of the cathedral were laid, there was a rumor that under the river's bend lay a library built of marble and salt, a vault of knowledge sealed by time itself. Most dismissed it as myth, another legend of drowned monks and saints who read by starlight. Yet, once in a generation, someone claimed to have seen its glow, a faint radiance rippling beneath the surface when the moon was new. The story begins with a historian named Etienne, who came to the town one winter when the river ran low. He had read of the legend in a 13th-century chronicle, a single line written in trembling Latin. "Under the water, the books still breathe." That was enough. He arrived with a lantern, a notebook, and a heart full of disbelief that wanted to believe. At dawn, mist drifted over the water like smoke from some unseen fire. Etienne followed the shoreline until he found the place where the current slowed. Beneath the surface he saw what looked like a step, carved stone worn smooth by centuries. He touched it with his hand and felt the faint pulse of cool marble, and something else, something alive, like a vibration waiting to speak. He returned that night when the world was quiet. He carried a small boat of oak, a single candle, and a rope that trailed like a tether to the living world. The moon was hidden. The air smelled of wet stone and iron. Slowly, he drifted to the center of the river and let the candlelight tremble on the water's skin. Beneath him, shadows stirred. At first he thought he imagined it, the outlines of steps, a balustrade, a great doorway yawning open into blue darkness. But as he leaned closer, he saw shelves, real shelves carved into the walls of an underwater hall. Rows upon rows of tablets, scrolls, and stone slabs, each one glowing faintly, as if lit from within by memory itself. He could not breathe. The current began to circle, gentle yet insistent, and a faint chime rang through the water, the sound of pages turning where no air moved. He whispered, though no one could hear, "Who built you?" No answer came, only the slow, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat deep beneath the centuries. Days passed. Each night Etienne returned. He drew maps, sketches, diagrams that made no sense in daylight. The villagers began to whisper about the stranger who spoke to the river. Some nights they saw him standing waist-deep in the water, candlelight flickering across his face, eyes half closed as if listening to something older than language. He began to record words that came to him in dreams. Amara, lignum, tempus dormiens. Bitter wood, sleeping time. None knew what it meant. Yet when he traced those words in ink, his candle flame bent toward the river, as though drawn by breath. One evening, during the spring thaw, the river swelled. The waters rose over the banks and swallowed the old bridge. Etienne was seen rowing into the flood, clutching his lantern against the rain. Witnesses said the current grew luminous, as though a city of stars had awakened beneath the torrent. He never returned. When the waters receded, The townspeople found his boat lodged in a willow, the candle still upright, unburnt. In his satchel they found damp pages filled with drawings, arches, stairways, shelves that spiraled downward into infinity. At the bottom of one sketch, a single line in his hand. The years we call lost have only learned to breathe underwater. Centuries have passed since then. The town has changed names. The cathedral bells no longer toll at dusk. Yet on nights when the moon hides and the river hums, fishermen say they see faint lights moving beneath the current. Slow, deliberate, like lanterns carried by unseen hands. Some say it is merely phosphorus, some ancient reflection of the stars. But others, the old ones who remember the hush of winter water, speak differently. They say the library still waits, its books sealed in glass and salt, its pages whispering stories from the centuries the world forgot. They say the hum of the river is not the sound of current at all, but the murmuring of voices reading, endlessly, beneath the dark. And sometimes, when the night is very still, if you kneel at the edge and hold your breath, you can almost hear them. Pages turning like sighs, soft words flowing in forgotten tongues. Perhaps they are the lost chronicles of those missing years, or perhaps they are prayers from another time, still rising, still seeking air. No diver has ever found the library. No map marks the place. But in that town where the river sings, people still leave candles on the water each winter, letting them drift downstream into shadow. The flames move quietly, one by one, toward the bend, toward the place where knowledge sleeps. Perhaps the light reaches it. Perhaps it never has to. For what is remembered by water does not need to be found. It only needs to be dreamed. It begins with a door that sighs when it opens, as though the stone itself remembers how to breathe. Deep beneath a hill of cypress and thyme, where cicadas quiet and even the wind walks softly, there lies a chamber sealed with iron, incense, and vow. The stairway that descends to it is worn at the center by the weight of many careful feet, monks and masons and secret keepers who carried their silence like a lantern. At the last step, the world narrows to a single fragrance, beeswax and old myrrh, and the hush that follows feels almost oceanic, a tide of stillness folding over the heart. The tomb is small, not a king's boast but a hermit's prayer. Walls of pale stone curve like a cupped hand around a sarcophagus of dark porphyry. Above it hangs a bronze ring, and from that ring, as if from the quiet center of a star, a candle burns. No drip mars the floor, no pool of wax crescents at the wick. The flame lifts and lowers in slow breaths, as if listening. Monks say it has lived longer than any of them can remember. The oldest chronicles say it was already lit when the first abbot knelt here. On the lid of the tomb, a date is carved, a century that cannot be, an inscription that belongs to an empire not yet born, and a ruler whose reign ends before it begins. In the gentle language of night, this is how the story is told. The emperor, restless in glory, sought a clock that would not lie. He feared the tyranny of numbers, how they flatten life into lines, and he feared the opposite, that memory, like smoke, would drift upward and vanish. So he summoned artisans of the lamp, apothecaries of temple oil, scribes who wrote with starlight names. In a room of cedar planks harvested on a winter moon, they mixed wax with dust from ancient altars, a pinch of salt from a dried sea, and shavings of a relic said to be a splinter of a comet, or a saint's staff, depending on the listener. They braided a wick from linen woven by widows who never remarried, women who had learned to make time gentle with their hands. When the candle was finished, the emperor carried it himself into the crypt, a space chiseled from the mountain like a vowel from a poem. He placed the candle above the stone box that would someday hold his bones, though his hair was still dark and his strength unbroken. He spoke a vow, neither proud nor afraid, that this flame would keep what history could not bear, that it would mark absence, not duration, that it would remember the breath between the centuries. Then he left, and the door sighed, and the ring held the small fire against the low, starless ceiling. And the candle learned to listen. Years unfurled like banners in wind. Wars blazed and cooled. Roads were mended, taxes counted, children named, orchards planted, bells cast and lifted. The empire swelled and thinned, a tide upon a continent of stone. Yet under the hill the flame neither fattened nor failed. Sometimes, in the winter watches, when frost spidered the lintels and wolves threaded the outer wood, the candle tilted its small head, as if hearing footsteps move through the silence of erased time. Sometimes it stilled completely, a gold seed held in still air. Sometimes it shivered, as if a procession of unremembered mourners had passed. There were caretakers, humble and faithful. Brother Seal, who cleaned the bronze ring with a cloth dipped in wine and rainwater. Sister Amata, who recited the Psalter backward, not in blasphemy but in reverence for things that move against the river. Old Prior Hugo, who tried once, only once, to cup the flame in his palm and felt a coolness, not heat, as if he had touched moonlight. None replenished the wick. None trimmed what did not grow. Their journals are consistent in their gentleness and wonder, and sometimes in small, careful fear. Each notes a similar phenomenon, though their hands differ. That on nights when comets were seen, or when eclipses hushed the fields, or when the calendar was corrected by decree, shaving days away like a shepherd shearing dew-heavy wool, the candle's light lengthened, then thinned, then steadied, as if the sky's arithmetic passed through the hill and rang the little fire like a bell. There is, in one vellum book now brittle as fallen leaf, a drawing, the tomb lid with its impossible date. The scribe was cautious. He copied every serif, every ligature, and beside them added a note no larger than a moth's wing. The year is written before the year was made. He did not speculate, or if he did, he hid his thoughts under prayer. He only recorded that the candle brightened when the inscription was traced by human eyes, as if it too remembered the shock of a truth that refuses to fit. Pilgrims came. A queen traveling in secret, who had lost 2 infants and could not bear the court's consolations. A mason whose hands shook after an accident on scaffolding high above a nave, convinced his shadow, had stepped aside. A widow who brought a small loaf and left with only crumbs, because she was certain the dead prefer the crust. They descended with careful breath, and when they stood within the chamber, the flame found them the way water finds a riverbed. Each reported a sensation not of heat but of recognition, like hearing a lullaby from a forgotten language. Each returned to the world with a private change. The queen slept without dreams for the first time in years. The mason returned to his tower and laid stone as if it were bone. The widow planted rosemary and wept less when it rained. Then there came a season of confusion, the kind the chronicles disguise with careful ink. An edict was posted in the capital. The calendar would leap, days would be erased, festivals untied and retied to new moons. Courtiers argued over saints. Scribes crossed out their own handiwork with reluctant grace. The empire inhaled, held its breath, and exhaled differently. In the tomb the candle trembled, shone like a small sun in water, and steadied once more. What was taken from daylight loosened something under stone. A rumor began, that 3 centuries had been moved, not lost, that time had folded like a cloak and a seam was stitched in darkness. One night, much later, a traveler reached the monastery at snowfall. He was not a monk, though he wore the color of ash. He asked no supper, only the mercy of the stair. The porter led him down with a lantern and left. The traveler stood before the flame and bowed his head. He had in his hands a bundle, an old map burned along its edges, a coin whose emperor never existed, and a lock of hair that looked like spun bronze. He laid them on the lid. He whispered a name that did not echo. The candle lifted higher, a slender tower of gentle fire, and for a long time the chamber seemed to widen, as if a field had opened within a seed. When the traveler emerged, dawn drew a pale line on the hills. He returned the way he'd come and was seen no more. In the log of the porter there is one sentence, written with a care that suggests trembling. The flame did not cast a shadow. The porter drew a small cross after the line and closed the book. What does a candle keep when it does not consume itself? Not hours, surely not days. Perhaps it keeps a posture, the world held in the act of listening. Perhaps it keeps a covenant, that somewhere our forgetting has a guardian, and that guardian is a simple light hung over a stone box with an impossible date. Or perhaps it keeps nothing at all, and what we feel near it is our own soul, uncluttered at last, warm with the nearness of a truth it cannot name. Sometimes late, a young monk descends alone. He kneels, hears his blood, hears the quiet chime of his own doubt easing. He thinks of the emperor who set this flame and of the people who walked through centuries they could not count. He thinks of calendars corrected and bells recast, of scrolls that crumble in salt air, of stars that arrive late and still are called on time. He tries to pray for the missing years and discovers he can only breathe long, slow, tender breaths that match the lift and fall of the little fire. And then he understands, not with thought but with bone, that the candle is not measuring what has passed, nor promising what will come. It is simply being, purely and without haste, a small celestial in a vault of stone. His task is witness. His gift is gentleness. Its lesson is this quiet, that some things do not resolve, they abide. If, one evening, you find yourself near that hill, and the time is crushed under your steps and the sky hangs like a blue veil above the cypress, ask for the stair. Descend without hurry. Lay your hand on the door that sighs. Enter. Stand before the flame. Do not ask it to explain. Simply notice how the air softens, how your ribs widen, how your name grows lighter. Perhaps you will hear a breath that is not yours. Perhaps you will remember someone you never met. Perhaps, glancing at the lid, you will feel the strangeness of a year out of place. And understand, without reason, that mercy can be a calendar too. And when you climb back into the wind, the world will seem the same. Carts on the road, bread in the oven, sparrows stitching the morning with their small threads of song. But there will be a tenderness at the center of things, as if a candle were still burning inside you, not to mark your hours, but to keep the silence where the centuries rest. It begins with a gate rimed in frost, a pale arch half buried in drifted snow. Beyond it, a road no cart has marked in centuries, a white corridor between firs bowed like monks in prayer. The air is clarion and breath-smoked, and every sound is gentled. The far hush of a river under ice, the soft crack of branches releasing their cold. Somewhere a bell-less tower stands, and the wind passes through its throat like a quiet hymn. You step forward, and the snow accepts you, as if the land has been waiting for your weight to return. They say the kingdom appears only in deep winter, when the moon is thin and the mountains ring like glass. Some place it in a high valley of the Central Pyrenees, others in the shadowed folds of the Carpathians. A few old maps mark a blank between ranges and write Hic Silent Annie. Here are silent years. The tales belong to the same weather. Night's blue is steel, day's pearl and breathless, a horizon the color of old milk. Stories drift like flakes, changing shape as they fall. Yet each holds the same seed, a people who slept 3 centuries and woke unchanged. At first you notice the footprints. Not yours, not animal, but human, delicate, evenly spaced, as if someone has walked ahead of you without haste. The prints are unsoftened by new snow, edges sharp as the cut of a coin, though no flakes have fallen for days. You follow. You turn. A stand of birch whispering under their white coats. And there, in a shallow bowl of the valley, roofs like sleeping backs rise from the drift. A hamlet, a market square, the suggestion of a wall under the powder, and at its center a gate carved with stars and wheat. Frost has taken the carvings in its crystalline script. The wheat gleams like ice. The stars hold tiny suns. What history would place here? A medieval settlement, perhaps. Stone and timber, hearth smoke and winter commerce. Scholars might speak of the Little Ice Age, the centuries when Europe learned again to live with sharper cold, when harvests shortened and rivers froze and villages shrank into themselves like animals in dens. But the stories move like breath across a mirror. They do not instruct. They invite. There is a difference. You pass the gate. A lane runs between houses whose shutters are closed and whose doors are bound by reed and ink. You recognize the ceiling not from old monastic bindings, a sign that something has been paused, not ended. In the square, a well is capped by a wheel of ice. Beneath it you hear water continue, a patient murmur. Along the eaves hang garlands woven of juniper and thin bells stopped with wax. The bells watch you with their metal mouths. No dog barks. No child cries. The silence is not empty. It is a careful holding of breath. Then, like a sleeve lifted from a lamp, you feel it, warmth, faint as a remembered hand. A door at the far side shivers, sheds its coat of frost, and opens on its own hinge. From the threshold steps a woman with hair the color of raw flax, plaited in a style you've seen on old stone saints. Her face is unlined, her eyes winter blue and steady. She wears a gown of undyed wool, a belt plaited with copper thread, leather shoes with the snow kept from them by greased cloth. When she speaks, her voice is low and even, and the language is cousin to the tongue of the valley below, only older, more round, like river stones. You have come at the quiet hour, she says. We are not supposed to wake. But some footsteps do not trouble the snow. Behind her, others rise from the drift as if the snow were a thin dream they are done with. Men with beards combed smooth, children with palms inked in protective spirals, elders with bracelets of woven bark. They blink without surprise. On their door lintels, chalk sigils glow faintly. Circles within circles. A wheat head, a star, a breath mark. You remember a marginal note in a winter chronicle. Villages that keep the old breathing. A phrase no archivist could explain. The woman leads you toward the well. We did not fall asleep, she says. We agreed to winter. She touches the ice wheel and it sings, a tone shy and crystal. The first famine came with a sky like tin, seasons misbuttoned. We could eat our seed or save it. We chose a longer breath. She speaks of a pact with the cold, signed not with kings but with patterns. Of the year when the aurora slid far south like a great curtain of veils, and the elders marked out a circle with ash and grain and breath. Of laying to rest the clocks and oiling the bells and teaching the heart to lengthen its beat. Of sleeping not as stones sleep, but as fields do what farmers call fallow, not dead but gathering. We turned like seeds, she says, smiling almost. We faced the dark with our eyes shut. You ask how long. She looks past you at the line of fur like a salter's ruled margin. Long enough that our neighbors forgot our names and then forgot forgetting. Long enough that new saints wore our old clothes and new taxes claimed our old chimneys. Long enough for the river to learn a slower language. When the next true winter reached its deep, the breath we stored loosened like knots in warm water. The snow remembered us. We stood. The village wakes with the careful grace of monks rising for vigils. No one hurries. Fires are coaxed, not struck. Bread returns to ovens as if it had only stepped outside to listen. A boy carries a sheaf of dried rush to the chapel whose rafters hold a century of spider thread. A girl sweeps the square with a broom of willow and does not mark your footprints as strange. In the chapel, which is also a granary, and a school, and a place where winter can be asked to sit a while, a wall painting blooms while you watch. Pigment clarifies in the chill, saints pick up their faded faces, stars brighten above a line of sleepers turned like a field in snow. There are contradictions. A coin in the alms bowl shows a ruler history does not keep. A length of cloth on the altar bears a pattern you have seen only in a museum's glass, labeled 10th C. Origin uncertain. A word in their prayer is a word your grandmother used once and then forgot. Yet nothing is displayed as marvel. It is all woven into use like a warmth stitched into the hem. At noon the sun turns the frost to sugar. Steam lifts from the well. An elder traces a spiral in the air and laughs softly. He tells you that time is not a road they travel, but a house with many rooms. They live in one until the snow invites them to another. We are not lost, he says, and his breath draws a brief cloud flower. We are kept. You ask what will happen at thaw. The woman touches your sleeve, a gesture light as falling ash. We will narrow ourselves again, she says. This is the law we agreed, to appear only when the world can hear us, and to return when it cannot. We are not spectacle. We are syllabus. She mispronounces the last word, tasting its syllables as if they were berries. Lessons in patience are not popular, she adds, and smiles like a hearth made from a single flame. Dusk stains the snow with rose. The bell-less tower hums, a sound like frost letting go of stone. Around you, the village returns itself to the soft order of sleep. Doors are closed gently, not latched. The garlands twitch and go still. The chalk sigils dull to the shade of bone. The woman walks with you to the gate. She does not ask you to keep their secret. She does not need to. Some truths hide by their own weight, as hills do. At the arch she stops. When you go down, she says, meaning the valley, the busy calendar, the warmed rooms. Remember that not every silence is empty. Some silence is stored. When the next winter lowers its veil, listen for the breath under the snow. It may be ours. It may be yours. You step past the gate. Behind you, the frost writes itself again upon the wood, and the stars and wheat return to their crystalline script. The road receives your leaving. Across the plain, the wind folds its blue cloth. In the darkness you carry a new slowness, a small hearth of gentle time. You cannot prove what you have seen. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it returns only to those who have learned to walk without hurrying. When you reach the river, it moves under a skin of ice with the calm of a creature that knows two languages. You kneel, press your palm to the pane of winter, and feel a faint answering warmth. Not from below, but from your own hand, reflected back. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some kingdoms wake only where patience is a kind of prayer. The gate behind you is gone now, a hill seamless in snow. But if you close your eyes, a bell-less tower hums in your ribs, and a lane opens between firs, and a woman of winter-blue eyes says, "We agreed to winter," and you understand, without conclusion, that the world keeps its mercies in hidden weather. You rise. Your breath draws a pale ribbon in the air. Night gathers like a cloak. And somewhere, in a room of the many-roomed house of time, a small people fold themselves gently into sleep, to wake when the snow remembers their names. It begins with a window that does not face the dawn. On a hill of chalk and wild thyme, the observatory is only a stone room with a slit of night cut into its roof. The shutters are heavy oak, tar-dark, and when they open the world becomes a bowl of cold ink. Inside, a table burnished by candle soot, an astrolabe whose edges shine like worn coins, and a book bound in leather so black it refuses the light. The astronomer works by listening before he looks, breath paced with the sky, quill resting like a quiet needle, pulse aligning to the slow turn of the heavens. He is not famous. His name belongs to parish rolls and winter ledgers, to the almanac that sets the sowing and the feast. Yet at night he keeps a second calendar, a tenderness for stellar things. He speaks the old names softly so they do not wake the world. Aldebaran, Fomalhaut, Alcyone, names carried into Europe on the tongues of travelers and scholars who read under desert lamps. The black notebook lies open. Its pages catch each star like a net made of silence. No diagrams for students, no noble dedications, only dates, angles, and small prayers for clarity in a universe that loves its veils. Tonight the air smells of snow. He sets the astrolabe against the slit of sky and tilts until the brass hums in his hand. The constellations fall into place with the obedient grace of a choir taking its stalls, and yet something is subtly awry. A cluster appears where no chart expects it. Another drifts, as if the ink of the firmament has not yet dried. The astronomer writes what he sees, not what he should. He has learned this is the first vow of the watcher, to honor the eye before the book. He remembers the tables he studied as a young man, the great compilations that tried to convince time to behave, the Alphonsine tables with their royal precision, the computus that reconciled Easter to the moon's shy arithmetic, the elegant circles of Ptolemy, epicycles nested like shells, and still the sky keeps its private pulse. He has watched eclipses hush the fields. He has seen comets draw slow knives of milk through shepherds' nights. He knows the heavens move, yes, but tonight they move as if a breath has been held for centuries and only now is released. He marks the hour against the candle's diminishing bell. The quill whispers across the page. Regulus 1 hair's breadth low. The sisters tight as frost. The great bear reluctant. He adds a note he never thought to write. The sky skipped. It is not a term of art. It is a confession. Something in the vault staggered and resumed, and the earth beneath his feet felt briefly like a ship adjusting to a hidden swell. Down the hill, the monastery bell counts matins. The brothers will chant what they have chanted for 1,000 dawns, syllables smoothed by centuries like river stones. The chant will fit the calendar even if the calendar does not quite fit the sky. Here, alone, the astronomer opens his black notebook to the earlier pages. The winter of the famine, the summer of the red moon, the year the river froze clear to its gravel bones. He sees what he did not intend to find, gaps that are not gaps in his keeping, but gaps in the sky's speech. Nights when the stars arrived late or failed to arrive, and the heavens, like a careful scribe, left a blank rather than a lie. He closes his eyes. On the inner lid of darkness constellations bloom, then drift, then repeat as if someone were leafing back and forth through the same chapter. A tender panic rises and dissolves. He whispers to no one. Perhaps the missing years are written in the firmament, and we have been reading only the margins. The thought feels dangerous, not because it threatens faith, but because it makes faith larger. A cathedral whose windows open not onto kings and thrones but onto night itself. He turns the astrolabe ring and takes another reading. The brass is cold as river stone. In the distance a fox barks once, the sound clean and solitary. He notes the hour by the water clock, a clay vessel that counts by dripping. A slow litany of drops, a monastic sermon in liquid. Each fall marks a moment, and yet between falls there is a hush that measures something else. He writes, between drops, the true measure. On the same line, as if the pen were a dowser, another phrase appears, between years, the true history. Light factual ground holds in the soft earth of his page. The drift of the equinox like a patient tide. The way sailors steer by Polaris though it, too, wanders in long decades. The calendar's small amputations. Those days the princes ordered undone so the harvest might keep faith with the moon. But he writes these facts as a gardener labels seeds. Knowing what is planted, never forcing what cannot sprout tonight. A cloud passes. The slit of sky darkens, then clears to a clarity so deep it seems almost music. He lifts the notebook and turns to a leaf he has left blank on purpose, a sacrament of abstaining. Now he breaks it with ink. If angels breathe, their breath is what moves the stars when history forgets its heartbeat. If stones remember, their memory is what bends the road so that travelers find again a village that snow has taught to sleep. If time keeps a ledger, it is balanced not by sums but by songs. The bells that ring from no tower, the candles that burn without eating themselves. He wants to say that he has seen the night repeat a word until it became a silence and then a meaning again. He wants to say that he has seen the world rewind by a single tender stitch. He writes instead, the heavens blinked, and in that blink there was an age. The candle gutters. He shields it with his hand. The flame steadies, a small amber planet with its own weather. He remembers, unbidden, a visit from a traveler years ago, a woman with desert on her boots and Greek in her pockets, who told him in a quiet way that in the libraries of the South there are treatises that speak of time as nested spheres, a music of cycles within cycles, and that sometimes a missing bar makes the whole song more beautiful. He did not know then what to do with that kindness. He writes her name on the margin like a star one notices late. The bell for lauds floats up the hill like a pale ribbon. He should sleep. Instead he draws a last circle in the air with the quill tip and aligns his instrument to the fragile line between night and not night. The horizon is a breathing thing. On it, Venus burns like a single held note. Lower, a faint paling. He sets the notebook square on the table and writes a final entry before the birds begin. We have calendars for what we can endure and candles for what we must adore. The sky keeps both. Tonight it showed its ledger of absence, whole stanzas crossed through by a careful hand, and still sang. Perhaps the skipped years were never empty. Perhaps they were the inhale before speech. He closes the black book. It seems heavier than when he opened it, as if ink itself had weight enough to tilt a world by a fraction. He folds the shutters. Inside the room the night remains, a last kindness for a watcher who must lay down his craft. He rests his forehead on the cool leather and listens to the retreat of the stars. Hoofbeats across an unseen bridge. No conclusion arrives. Only the soft permission to stop measuring. When he finally sleeps, the notebook sleeps too, a dark seed on a wooden field. In dreams he walks a road beneath a cathedral of constellations, and the constellations are pages, and the pages are wings, and the wings make a wind that smells of snow and myrrh. He does not wake with answers. He wakes with slower breath. He wakes knowing some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some mysteries do not resolve. They return, like evening, faithful, tender, exact. It begins with a window lit from within, though the dusk outside is thick as pewter. The square is empty, the market stalls folded like sleeping wings, and a fine rain threads the air as quietly as incense. The cathedral rises from the cobbles not as a fortress but as a breath, every arch a rib, every buttress a hand held gently to the sky. You stand at the threshold and feel the ancient hush. Lime and chalk, beeswax and wet wool, candle smoke braided through the centuries. Somewhere a bell speaks once and falls silent, a single drop in a vast, still well. Inside, the nave is a long inhalation. Pillars climb like trees toward a dusk of stone, and the vault above is a night made from limestone constellations, bosses like little moons, keystones like sleeping stars. The floor keeps footprints the way a shoreline keeps wave marks. Years have flowed and withdrawn, and the pattern remains. In the north aisle a brass line runs in the tiles, a faint reminder of the old meridian the canons used to fix the feast days to the sun. Light factual ground amid mystery. The church once measured the heavens here. A pinhole in the south wall, a noon beam creeping across the floor, a whisper of astronomy in the house of prayer. Even now, when the rain pauses, the vault seems to hold a memory of clear sky. The dream begins as all true dreams do, without announcement, with a soft turning of attention. At first you think it is only the weather changing, the dusk thinning, the glass brightening, but then you see it. In the great rose of the west window, crimson deepens to wine, blue deepens to sea, and the saints along the tracery shift their weight as if the stone were a hammock and they had remembered their bodies. No, not bodies, they're listening. Their faces become more attentive, their hands less emblem and more breath. The cathedral is not moving. It is waking to its own stillness. You walk the nave as one walks a field of snow. Slowly, carefully, leaving space for silence to speak. Each window now holds an image you do not recall from any guidebook. In one, a king without a crown kneels before a plow. The soil bears constellations instead of clods. In another, a woman pours oil into a lamp that never lowers. In a third, a ship sails across a map with no coastlines, only currents. The captions, if they ever existed, are gone. The colors are not brighter but nearer, like a candle set closer to the page. At the crossing, beneath the tower, the pavement cools your feet through your shoes. You look up. The vault is a web, a geometry of mercy. Radiating ribs resolve into a pattern like the palm of a hand, creases of fortune, lifeline and loveline, a map of years counted and uncounted. You think of the old stonecutters who laid these ribs upon air, the rope scar on a mason's wrist, the chalk marks left by a vanished apprentice. The cathedral dreams of them as a mother dreams of a child's first steps. Not of greatness, but of steadiness. You feel steadier in his gaze. And then the choir screen flickers like water. You draw closer and see that the carved angels along the screen are not frozen in adoration. They lean, they confer, their wings a little unpinned, the tips of feathers chipped by centuries of cleaning now soft as breath. One points at the high altar where a white cloth lies like snowfall. Another gestures upward where the clerestory windows show scenes that never happened and yet feel familiar. A procession at midnight led not by clergy but by stonemasons carrying their tools like relics. A harvest brought inside the nave and stored among pillars while the winter storms passed. An old woman teaching children to read by tracing letters onto the warm flank of a sunlit pillar. This church has sheltered more than Massachusetts. It has sheltered the weather of living. In the south transept a small door opens to a stair as narrow as a throat. You climb, hand to the cool wall, and emerge into the triforium. The walkway in the thickness of the building, the place of caretakers and candle trimmers. From here the arcades below look like folded paper, and the people, few tonight, are gentle lights moving under a stone sky. You pass the organ loft where pipes stand like a forest of silver reeds. A draftsman's compass lies on a bench, so old the metal has dulled to the color of morning fog. Beside it, a scrap of vellum bears a drawing of the nave as if seen from above, but at the center, instead of a crossing, there is a spiral. Someone once imagined the cathedral not as a cross, but as a breath turning inward. When you return to the floor, the dream is deeper. The great east window no longer shows saints at all. It shows a river under starlight. On its surface float pages, parchment leaves, linen pages, palm leaf manuscripts, each inscribed with a hand you cannot fix to a century. A line appears and vanishes. The years that vanished did not leave. They dissolved like salt into the water of the world. The letters are not sermon, not decree. They are weather, passing through the glass the way wind passes through pine. You are not being told. You are being held. A child in a pew turns and looks up toward a stone corbel where a little carved animal, a dog perhaps, rests its chin on its paws. The child lifts a finger and the dog's ears sharpen. You laugh without sound. Either the cathedral is laughing or you are, or both. In the side chapel of the carpenters, a votive candle flickers toward a bit of wood dark with age. The legend says it came from the first scaffold this nave ever knew. You imagine it. Ropes creaking, planks laid like sentences, men walking their grammar in the air. Outside the rain returns, and the sound on the lead roof is like prayer spoken in a language without consonants. Facts arrive gently, like beads on a string. A mason's mark repeats in 3 pillars. Triangle within circle, circle within triangle, the old marriage of geometry and trust. A ledger in the sacristy, you glimpse it as a verger passes through, records that in the 13th year of a forgotten reign the chapter debated whether to lower the floor and raise the vault to cure a proportion that felt wrong in the chest. They raised it. The voice in the building changed key. People slept better after vespers. You smile at the kindness of that. As the organ breathes, though no hands are on its keys, a pedal note gathers like weather over a sea. The windows answer. Colors draw into deeper colors. The choir stalls. Their misericords carved with leaves and beasts seem to exhale, and you exhale with them. Through the high stone screen you glimpse the altar again, and on it a small white feather you had not noticed before. It lifts, falls, lifts. Perhaps a draft. Or perhaps the building is reminding you that stone is not the opposite of air. Stone is air made patient. Time folds not forward or back but inward. The cathedral remembers being forest, quarry, harbor for starlings, scaffolding, winter shelter, school in a year of plague when desks were borrowed from the Guildhall, and set between pillars, granary in a famine when grain sacks leaned like sleeping pilgrims along the north wall. It remembers a night when the bell rope broke and the rope's end struck sparks on the flagstones like a burst of meteors, and the people cheered because they needed cheering. It remembers weddings where a bride's veil flashed like fish in a river of song, and funerals where the smoke wrote quick alphabets in cold air. It remembers not as a list, but as a weather pattern, a kindness of pressure and release. You realize you are standing in a chest, and that chest is breathing, and that breath is older than kings. A final turn of dreaming. The nave darkens to that particular near night just before all lamps are lit. The west door opens a hand's width and admits a thread of blue dusk. In that thread you feel the whole world. Streets slick with rain, a woman buying bread, a boy chasing his hat, a dog shaking stars of water from its ears. The cathedral receives them all as a harbor receives tide. On the pillar beside you a chalk spiral glows, faint as milk. You touch it. Your fingertip comes away clean, but something inside you has been marked, a small circular permission to be slow. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, this dreaming. Perhaps it is what the building does whenever someone enters with knees that remember how to bend. You make your way back toward the door, and as you go the windows quiet into their customary saints. The feathers settle, the meridian line becomes only brass again. Yet the air around your ribs remains spacious, and your steps find a rhythm that feels older than your name. Outside, the rain has washed the square to silk. The bell speaks once more, not to command the hour, but to bless it. You look back. The cathedral stands as it stood. But now you know, stone can keep a dream the way water keeps a star. And when you close your eyes that night, a nave will rise within you, and a rose window will open like a slow, red tide, and a voice without a mouth will say only this: be gentle, be patient, let the centuries breathe. It begins with the sound of paper that isn't there. A hush moves through the corridors, not the hush of obedience or study, but of something older, almost natural, like wind turning a field of reeds. The lamps are low and steady, their light golden as diluted honey. Shelves rise in long, patient rows, carved from wood darkened by centuries of touch. Each carries a thin residue of dust, a faint shimmer of former weight, as if the books once resting there have left behind their shadows. The library is vast, yet unmeasured. No clock marks its hours. No footsteps hurry. It stands on a hill that overlooks a city whose name has slipped from maps, a city of bells and fountains that no longer ring. Those who come here find the door unlocked, though no keeper lives within. They step softly, and the air receives them like water. What they seek, they cannot say. What they find, they cannot fully remember. Once there were volumes, the chronicles of the south wind, the treatises of forgotten time, the hymnal of the celestial hours. The names linger, whispered by the walls when the candles tremble, but the pages themselves blank. Not torn, not burned, simply white, as though the words had breathed themselves away. Some say it happened overnight, that a storm crossed the valley, silver lightning, rain of silence, and by morning every book had unlearned itself. Others believe it was gradual, that the ink faded like an old star, too gently to notice. Whichever tale is true, the result remains the same: a library emptied not of substance, but of certainty. You walk between the shelves. A breeze follows, carrying the scent of parchment and time. The air feels alive, as if the absence hums. You pause at a reading table where a single quill stands upright in an inkless pot. It moves faintly, almost like breathing. On the tabletop lies a book open to a middle page, unmarked, unwritten, flawless. Yet in its whiteness you sense an echo, the faint rhythm of a forgotten paragraph, like a heartbeat beneath snow. At the far end of the hall stands the great atrium, its dome painted with stars that drift slowly, not painted at all but luminous, changing. Here, silence becomes presence. Beneath the dome sits a desk of marble, smooth as water, and behind it a chair that seems recently vacated. You can feel the warmth still in the air, as though someone rose only moments ago. A feather floats down from the high beams, drifts through the candlelight, lands before you without sound. You begin to understand. The library has not lost its memory. It has decided to keep it differently. There are no catalogs here, no lists, no records of what was read or borrowed. Yet if you touch the shelves, gently with both hands, words begin to stir. Not letters, not sentences, but sensations. A scent of pine, a fragment of wind over ruins, the murmur of waves against marble, a woman humming while grinding ink in a distant century. Every shelf holds a kind of weather, and every visitor carries away a different season. Once, long ago, a scholar came to write a history of these vanishing years, the centuries that slipped between calendars. He stayed 7 nights. When he left, his scroll was empty, but his eyes shone as if filled with light reflected from invisible pages. He said nothing, only pressed his palm against the lintel as he departed, leaving a faint print that glowed for days before dissolving into the stone. The monks who guard nothing still come sometimes, hooded in dusk. They light the candles, sweep no dust, turn no pages. They simply sit. For them, reading is not the act of seeing words, but of listening to silence as it arranges itself into meaning. Sometimes, when they breathe together, the air seems to shimmer, and the walls emit a low tone, a chord made not of sound but of understanding. On one wall, near the oldest window, faint inscriptions trace themselves across the plaster. They are not legible. They drift and fade like mist, yet their rhythm feels familiar, like the slow rise and fall of sleep. If you close your eyes, You might almost hear the library speaking in a tongue made of pauses, sighs, and the turning of imagined pages. It does not speak to be known. It speaks to remind you that knowing is not the only way to be awake. There is a legend that the books will return one day, but only when humankind learns to read without taking, to know without claiming, to speak without noise. Until then, the shelves remain patient, holding their quiet as a candle holds its flame. Night deepens. The last light seeps from the dome, and the stars painted their fade into the true constellations above. You sit at the marble desk. The open book before you gleams faintly. For a moment you think you see words appear, slow, glowing, soft as breath, but they vanish before you can read. Perhaps they were never meant to stay. Perhaps the library, in its mercy, lets every seeker write only in the air, so that the wind may finish the sentence. You rise. Your footsteps sound like part of a ritual, one the floor has known since it was first laid. As you pass between the shelves, you realize you are no longer seeking knowledge but remembering peace. At the threshold, you glance back. The lamps are dim, the air still golden. For an instant, you think you see figures among the aisles. Not ghosts, not librarians, but the books themselves, walking upright, leafless yet luminous, turning their invisible pages toward the stars. Outside, the rain has stopped. The air smells of ink and soil. You breathe once, and it feels like reading. You close your eyes, and it feels like prayer. Perhaps this was always the purpose of the place, not to store what was said, but to remind us how to listen. The library forgot its books only to remember silence. And in that silence, everything remains, intact, unwritten, eternal. It begins at dusk, where the world softens between two lights, the last breath of day and the first quiet shimmer of night. The bridge stretches across a valley whose river has long since vanished, leaving only a hollow of fog and reeds. Its stones are pale with lichen, smooth from centuries of footsteps that no longer come. The air beneath the arches hums faintly, as if some old current still moves there, unseen but remembered. The bridge stands without purpose now, yet it remains, and in its remaining it dreams. They say it was built in the reign of a nameless king, by masons who swore an oath to bind earth and sky. Its arches were measured not with rope, but with song. Each stone was placed to the rhythm of a psalm that spoke of passage and return. The river then was wide and alive, a mirror for the stars. Barges floated beneath. Children ran above. Travelers left offerings at the keystone for safe crossings. The bridge became the valley's heart, a span not only of stone, but of trust. Then, as all rivers do, it changed its mind. The water thinned, drifted east, and finally fled underground. Crops dried, reeds turned brittle, and the valley fell silent. The bridge watched as the current departed, its arches still curved to cradle motion that no longer passed beneath. To others it became ruin, to itself memory. Each dawn the mists would rise, and in that silver vapor the bridge would feel again the touch of flowing time. Not truly water, but something close, the breath of all things that move and vanish. And when the wind came from the east, it carried faint ripples of sound, the old song of the builders echoing through the gaps between stones. Once, a traveler arrived at twilight. He came not seeking a way across, but a way back. His sandals were dusted white. His cloak smelled of rain. He stood at the center arch and placed his hand on the cold parapet. Beneath his palm the stone seemed to thrum, as though remembering its own creation. He whispered, "Tell me where the river went." The bridge did not answer, at least not in words. But the air thickened, and a damp fragrance rose. Moss, waterweed, childhood. The traveler closed his eyes, and for a heartbeat he heard the river again. Laughter, hooves, the slap of oars, the bell of a mule crossing before dawn. He saw the river's skin glittering under a sky so young it had no constellations yet. When he opened his eyes, his hand was wet with dew, though the valley was dry. He stayed until morning, and when the light grew pale and clear, he noticed a pattern etched faintly along the parapet. Lines of script too delicate for carving. They shimmered, then vanished. He bent closer and caught only one phrase before it dissolved. What crosses is not always what flows. The villagers who still lived in the hills spoke of him afterward. They said he left with slower steps, as though he had learned the weight of stillness. Some claimed that, since that night, the bridge sometimes hums under moonlight, a low and patient tone, like a distant tide returning through stone. Centuries passed. Empires flared and cooled. Roads shifted, names were forgotten. Yet each winter, when the fog gathered thick in the hollow, travelers swore they saw a faint sheen moving beneath the bridge, as if the river had come back to visit its own ghost. Birds nested in the parapets. Ivy braided the railings, but the stones remained warm to the touch, as if holding a pulse. One scholar, drawn by rumor, came to study its geometry. He brought instruments, strings, chalk. Measuring the arches, he realized their ratios matched not the mathematics of bridges but the intervals of hymns, the pattern of chords once sung in Gregorian cloisters. When wind crossed the valley just right, the air through the arches produced a music of pure intervals, a harmony too exact for accident. "It's still singing," he wrote in his journal. "The bridge remembers what it was built for, to let sound cross where water cannot." He camped beside it 3 nights. On the last, he dreamed he was standing beneath the central span. The stones glowed faintly, the arches opening like ribs of a great creature asleep. Through them flowed light, liquid, slow, gold, a river not of matter but of memory. And in that current, faces drifted by. The builders, the children, the mule drivers, the traveler who once listened. Each looked peaceful, not gone but resting in passage. He woke with tears on his cheeks and left the next morning, saying nothing. Now and then pilgrims still come. Some bring bottles of river water from distant lands, pouring them through the cracks as offerings. Others bring silence. They sit upon the parapet at dusk and close their eyes. Sometimes a faint mist rises to meet them. Sometimes nothing happens, yet they all leave gentler than they arrived. Perhaps that is the bridge's remaining purpose, to teach patience to those who have lost their flow. Scholars have argued for centuries why the bridge never crumbled. Its mortar should have failed long ago. Its keystones should have slipped. Yet it endures. Perhaps the builder's psalms made the lime itself remember music. Perhaps moss has taken the place of mortar. Or perhaps, as one monk wrote, "Stone is not what resists time, but what befriends it." When the moon is new, and clouds drift low, the valley becomes sea again. The fog moves beneath the arches like tidewater. The bridge hums faintly. If you stand there long enough, you might hear the whisper of oars turning, the soft call of someone unseen guiding the way. The sound fades if you strain to listen, but if you let it come, gently, it returns. What the bridge remembers is not the river's body, but its rhythm. The eternal passage between one silence and another. It remembers the shimmer of connection, the gratitude of return. And though the world around it changes, fields abandoned, maps rewritten, the bridge continues its single vow, to stand where movement once was, and to honor what still moves unseen. At dawn, mist curls around its feet. The first light pours along the balustrade like milk. A bird lands on the parapet, drinks from a hollow filled with dew. For a moment the valley is full again, not with water, but with understanding. The bridge sighs, almost imperceptibly, and you realize it has not outlived its river. It has simply learned to flow differently. And when you walk away, the echo of your steps falls into rhythm with that ancient song, the song of what endures by remembering, and what remembers by letting go. It begins at dawn, on a hill where the clouds arrive before the light. A single tower rises there, slender, patient, and utterly still. Its walls are pale with age, streaked by rain, its steps hollowed by centuries of cautious ascent. No one recalls who built it. The nearby village calls it the listener. To strangers, it is only a ruin. But at sunrise, when the mist drifts low and the valley fills with gold, the tower breathes. Each morning it inhales the wind. It was said to have been built by a mathematician who loved silence more than proof. He came from a city of scholars where the stars were named and renamed until they lost their mystery. He left that city and followed the wind, west through plains, north through pine forests, until it led him to this hill, where the air carried voices not of men, but of time itself. There, he began to build, not to measure height, but to listen to movement. The tower's windows faced the four directions, narrow slits cut like the strings of an instrument. When the wind passes through, it sings, low and hollow from the east, bright and trembling from the west, long and mournful from the north, soft and uncertain from the south. Inside, the air itself is the clock, the symphony, the witness. Long ago, travelers spoke of hearing entire stories in those tones. Wars ending, empires sighing, seeds carried to new soil. The mathematician wrote in a scroll now lost, "Numbers can count what is seen. Only sound can measure what passes through." And so he began recording not data but feeling. He charted the music of tempests and calms, each gust a page, each lull a pause. Centuries later, the scrolls were gone, but the tower still stood. The villagers would climb halfway to leave offerings. Feathers, folded prayers, bits of glass that caught the dawn. They said the tower kept the weather from wandering too far, that as long as it listened, the seasons would return. Inside, the air smells of lime and rain. The staircase turns upward like a spiral shell. As you climb, the wind's voice shifts. A flute in one passage, a whisper in another. Sometimes you hear what sounds like words, a call and answer, the syllables of something ancient and kind. When you reach the top, you find a single brass ring suspended from the ceiling. It moves slightly, not by your touch, but by the air's will. You realize the tower is not resisting the wind. It is translating it. From the height, the world below looks still. Fields gray with dew, roofs half lost in mist, a river coiling through the trees. Yet you can feel the motion hidden in everything. Wheat swaying, smoke bending, birds cutting invisible arcs. The ring trembles, hums, then steadies. The tower listens, and through its stillness you begin to sense the shape of what it hears. The passage of time not as a line, but as breath. Scholars who later examined the site found that the tower's proportions followed no geometric canon, neither square nor golden mean, but an odd ratio close to the harmonic of a human lung. The walls were thinner near the top, thick near the base, as though designed to resonate, to breathe. Some argued it was an early barometer, some a failed experiment in acoustics. Yet others, standing inside, found themselves silent, unreasonably calm, as if their thoughts had been tuned. A hermit once lived near the base. He claimed that on nights of strong wind, the tower whispered the true names of forgotten centuries, the ages men had skipped over in their histories. The air remembers, he said, every sigh, every oath, every breath ever taken. The tower only listens. At sunset, the sound changes. The hill glows amber, and the wind gentles. You place your palm against the stone and feel the tower exhale. A single, long note that fades into the valley. The air grows still, as if holding its own reflection. And in that quiet, you understand. The tower measures not speed nor pressure, but presence. It measures the simple fact that the world is always moving, even when you are not. You descend slowly. On the last step, a faint gust brushes your shoulder like a hand. It smells of rain far away, of pine, of someone whispering your name centuries before you were born. When you look back, the tower stands exactly as before, unchanging and infinite. But now you know its secret, it endures because it listens. And as you walk down the hill, the wind begins again, turning every blade of grass into a soft instrument. The whole valley sings a single patient song. That to listen deeply is to live forever. It begins in a valley where seasons forget their order. The trees bloom before the snow melts. The air carries spring and autumn at once. At the heart of this strange rhythm lies a walled garden, small, circular, hidden between two cliffs like a sigh between breaths. Its gate bears no lock, only a pattern of vines that seem to have grown into deliberate symbols. Locals call it El Jardín del Silencio, the Garden of Silence. They say it blossoms only once every 100 years. At dawn, it looks lifeless. The soil is gray as ash. The paths are made of pale stone veined like skin. Yet when the first ray of sunlight crosses the ridge, something shifts. The air hums. Mist gathers low, coiling around roots and fallen leaves. And from beneath the soil, petals begin to rise. Not slowly, but as if remembering what they once were. Flowers of impossible colors unfurl. Blue that feels like music, gold that hums like bees from forgotten summers. White that seems to drink the light instead of reflecting it. Each bloom lasts one night. No one knows who planted them. Some claim the garden was built by monks who measured eternity not by years but by blossoms. Others whisper it was once a burial ground for kings, each flower a dream of a dynasty long gone. Whatever its origin, the place feels older than memory and younger than dawn. The wind there does not pass through. It lingers as if listening. Travelers who find the garden rarely do so by intention. They arrive while seeking something else, water, rest, forgiveness, and stumble upon the gate when their thoughts are quiet enough to see it. Upon entering, their breath slows. They say time folds there. One can hear the sound of future rain, or see petals opening that have not yet bloomed. The scent alone carries stories. Lavender for remembrance, myrrh for endings, rosemary for truth. And beneath it all, the faint sweetness of earth that knows it will return to itself. Each visitor leaves differently. A scholar once came with paper and ink, intending to record every species. When dawn came, his pages were blank, yet his handwriting glowed faintly in the dark, as if written by moonlight too shy to stay. A widow came seeking her husband's voice. She left with a single white petal that never withered. Children who wander in often sleep before the flowers, dreaming of colors that no one can describe when they wake. The villagers say the garden chooses its witnesses. Every century, when the moon and stars align above the cliffs, the blossoms awaken in chorus. For one night, the valley glows like an inverted sky, and then, before morning, everything folds back into silence. The petals sink into the earth, the colors drain, and the garden returns to its ashen calm, as if nothing sacred had happened, though the scent lingers for weeks afterward. There are records carved into the stones around the gate. Not words, but spirals. Historians who traced them discovered the same pattern etched into ancient calendars and temple floors across distant lands. It is as if this place speaks in geometry, a language of circles, returns, and patience. The bloom every 100 years is not miracle but memory, an act of recollection by the earth itself. Perhaps this is how nature prays. In the center of the garden stands a pool, still and dark, bordered by reeds. On the night of bloom, its surface reflects stars that are not in the sky. If one watches long enough, the reflection shifts, showing faces, towers, oceans. Scenes not of the present, but of what has been or may yet be. It is said that those who gaze too long forget their names, trading them for understanding. They leave lighter, but never quite whole. At dawn, the wind rises again. Petals fall like snow, then vanish before touching the ground. The hum fades, the light dulls, and silence returns. By the second sunrise, not even the scent remains. The soil lies bare, the pool dark, the vines dry. Only the faint warmth in the stones suggests that something has breathed there. And yet, centuries later, travelers will still speak of it. Of a night when the earth bloomed to remind itself it was alive. Of a fragrance that stayed in their dreams for years. Of silence so complete it felt like mercy. The garden teaches no lessons, promises no reward. It only invites, once every 100 years. For those who are listening, it begins where the ocean forgets its borders. Far beyond the charts of known winds, there lies an island shaped like a crescent moon. Half awake, half submerged, as though it had once tried to rise into the sky and then changed its mind. From the distance it appears to shimmer, not with sunlight, but with something older, as if the sea itself remembers it differently. Sailors who claim to have seen it say it drifts slightly each century, chasing a constellation that no longer exists. At dusk, the island glows faintly. The sands are not white but pale blue, as if made of ground glass. The palms bend in a rhythm that matches no breeze, and the air carries a quiet vibration, like the echo of an ancient choir. At the island's center stands a circle of black stones, polished, deliberate, aligned so precisely that when the night deepens, their shadows trace the paths of forgotten stars. No one lives there now, but once long, before history's handwriting, a people did. They built with coral and silence. They named the sea not by its colors, but by its moods. They believed the stars were islands too, adrift in the vast dark, and that both sea and sky were mirrors of one another, each dreaming of the other, forever reflecting what it longed to become. Their priests were not readers of books but listeners of tides. They kept records in the sound of waves, in the rhythm of conch shells, and in the hush that followed storms. When a child was born, they marked its destiny not with words, but with light. They would wait until nightfall, lift the newborn toward the constellations, and name it after whichever star flickered in response. But the stars began to change. One winter, the priests noticed that familiar constellations no longer rose where they should. The sky's compass had turned, or perhaps the island itself had shifted. They tried to correct their maps, but each dawn erased what they drew. And then the dreams began, collective, relentless, identical. Each inhabitant dreamt of the same thing, the stars sinking into the sea like stones. The priests took this as an omen not of doom, but of calling. They gathered beneath the black stones and waited for the sky to answer. For 7 nights the heavens stayed silent. On the 8th, a single star fell, slowly, gracefully, into the horizon. The sea shimmered, the air grew still, and in that moment, the island began to hum. Some say the island sank that night. Others say it rose unseen into the sky. But those who have crossed that part of the ocean tell of strange phenomena. Compasses spinning, waves forming concentric circles, and stars appearing reflected on the water's surface as though both heavens and sea were overlapping for a breath of time. A sailor once wrote in his log, "We saw the sky below us." Another wrote, "We anchored among constellations." Centuries later, when explorers rediscovered the region, they found nothing but open water. Yet their instruments recorded faint magnetic pulses in the pattern of a spiral. Mathematicians studied the readings and realized the pattern matched the precession of the northern stars, as if the island were still dreaming of them from beneath the waves. Scholars argue whether the tale is myth or memory. But on nights when the sea is calm and the sky clear, fishermen speak of hearing a low music, not from wind, nor whale, nor current, but from deep below, a sound like the slow turning of a celestial sphere. Some say it is the hum of coral, others the sigh of drowned temples. And some, more quietly, believe the island still dreams, not of land but of return. They say that once every few centuries, when a certain alignment occurs, the same as the one that marked the island's last night, the sea grows glass smooth, and for a few moments, the stars above and their reflections below meet perfectly. In that mirrored silence, those who drift across the water feel weightless, as if both sky and sea were breathing through them. One logbook from a lost expedition describes it. "We sailed through starlight, yet no light touched us. The heavens bent close, whispering their reflections into the waves. The island was not seen, but we felt its gaze, vast, patient, dreaming. Perhaps that is the island's secret. It never vanished. It only changed its language. It stopped speaking through earth and began to speak through the tides and the constellations themselves. So people, too, may not have drowned. They may simply have risen, dissolved into starlight, scattered like pollen through the night sky, continuing their ritual of naming, whispering new stars into being. And when you stand by the ocean at night, listening to the horizon breathe, you might sense it, that faint, rhythmic pulse beneath the waves, like a great heart sleeping. If you close your eyes, the air seems to tilt, and for a moment, you cannot tell whether you stand upon the earth or among the stars. Perhaps it is all the same. Perhaps the island still dreams, and in dreaming, keeps the sky from forgetting us. It begins with a sound, not of rushing water, but of water remembering how to move. In a quiet valley far from maps, there runs a river that does not obey direction. By daylight it winds east like any faithful stream, Yet under moonlight it turns, tracing its silver path uphill, climbing softly toward its own beginning. Villagers call it the returning river. The old maps name it differently each century, as if no cartographer could keep its loyalty long enough to be sure. At first glance, it seems trickery, an illusion of tide or wind, but those who stay through dusk know the truth. The current reverses with the stars. Each night, it travels backward, gathering leaves, whispers, and reflections, returning them to the forest where they were born. Fishermen who have dropped nets there find their ropes tightening in 2 times at once, pulled east by morning, west by dream. No one knows when the river began this ritual. The monks of the nearby monastery say it happened after the great drought, when the valley cracked and prayed. They tell of a storm that arrived without thunder, rain falling upward, drops retreating to the clouds, and of a single day when all water turned and listened. From then on, the river remembered both ways. At the water's edge, moss glows faintly blue, as though lit from within by memory. Stones along the bank are smooth on both sides, polished equally by opposite journeys. And the sound, soft, continuous, patient, feels less like a flow and more like breath. Sometimes, in the hours before dawn, voices drift upon the surface. They are not words, only echoes, perhaps of those the river has carried and returned. Travelers who find the valley often come by mistake. They wander through fog and silence until they hear that sound, like pages turning underwater. The locals say the river calls to those who have lost their path, those whose hearts have become tide-bound in grief or longing. To see the river reverse is to remember that nothing truly ends. Everything simply retraces. A legend endures. Once a scholar came seeking proof. He built wooden markers along the bank and measured the current by candlelight. But when night fell, his instruments failed. His sandglass froze mid-drop, his compass spun, and his reflection stared back older than he was. By morning, he found his footprints leading into the water, and none returning. He wrote one final line in his journal. "It is not the river that moves backward. It is time that breathes in 2 directions." The monastery keeps his quill in a box of glass. The ink at its tip never dried. There are days when the river runs normally, as though tired of its own wonder. The villagers wash their clothes, lead their animals, collect silt for their gardens. But when the moon grows full and pale, the water begins to hum. The surface thickens like mercury, and slowly, quietly, the current turns. Those who live nearby close their doors, for to watch the reversal is to feel one's own memories stir. Lost faces, old songs, promises half forgotten. The monks leave candles on the bridge, their flames bending upstream. One winter, a young novice dared to wade in as the current changed. He said he felt warmth beneath the cold, a pulse, as if the river had a heart that beat in the shape of years. When he emerged, he could recall nothing of his childhood sorrow. Only the scent of rain remained with him, like a kindness that refused to vanish. The returning river does not grant wishes, teaches the art of release. What goes is not gone. What returns is not the same. The villagers have learned to bury their dead near its source, so that, in time, the current might carry their silence gently back to where all beginnings rest. In spring, when the fog hangs low, the river gleams like glass. You can see both sky and depth, constellations mirrored against stones. If you listen closely, the sound of flowing seems layered, as if 2 worlds whisper together, one remembering, one forgetting. Between them, the river exists not as a boundary, but as a bridge of motion. No traveler has ever followed it to its origin. Those who try vanish into mist, leaving only ripples that drift in both directions. Some say the source is not a mountain, but a memory the earth refuses to let go of, perhaps the first tear of rain, or the sigh that separated sea from sky. When dawn breaks and the current resumes its earthly course, the valley shines like newly made glass. Birds rise. The monks ring a bell that has no clapper. The wind strikes it for them. And the sound that echoes down the valley is strangely tender, as if time itself were bowing to its reflection. Perhaps the river is not a miracle but a reminder that even time must rest, and sometimes, to keep moving forward, the world must flow gently backward for a while.